Welcome to Explore. I'm Mary Ruth Snyder. I'm the Executive Director for the Campbell River and District Chamber of Commerce and the host of this lovely show being filmed in the studio. First time in 2 years here at Shaw Spotlight on Rob Ron Road. And I am thrilled to have as our guest today, Marjorie Greaves. Marjorie is very well-known face and name around Campbell River. In fact, she worked in this very building for over 17 years. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad you're back.
Good to be here, I think.
How does it feel to be back in the building? It's 4 years since you left.
It's a little bit deja vu. I was driving down Alder and then went eek and onto Rob Ron and just after lunch, and yeah, it's a little deja vu actually, oddly enough.
You know, time is such a funny thing. When I say that you were here in this building for 17 years plus, it doesn't feel that long. And I worked with you for 7 of those years here, along with Gord, who's in the master control there. It doesn't seem that it went in a blink of an eye.
It did go in a blink of an eye.
Now, before we dig into your history, let's just talk very briefly. What is your favorite memory of working under the CRTV umbrella?
CRTV. Well, lots of things. Cooking shows. We did lots of cooking shows.
Okay.
I came to CRTV armed with, let's just turn it into the Food Channel. So I think we had like 5 or 6 different shows going at the same time.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it was all about the cooking shows and the Food Channel. And the Food Network, it was just coming on at that time too, so lots of food porn, and yeah, it was just great. Yeah.
And then what was your favorite memory from your days with Shaw?
With Shaw, boy, we did so much. I'm drawing a blank actually in the moment, I'm sorry.
Okay. We'll come back to that.
Okay, yeah.
All right, so let's begin with where you began. Where were you born and raised?
I grew up in Pembroke, or I was born in Pembroke, Ontario, and then spent most of my formative years in the village of Hastings, Ontario, population 932.
Wow.
In the Kawartha Lake District in Ontario.
That's a beautiful area.
It was beautiful, and it was a nice small town. We had like 7 or 8 streets. We had, in my elementary school, from kindergarten to grade 8, I think we had 108 students. So it was a nice intimate thing, right?
Yeah. Now, what would you say from those years of growing up in small town Ontario, how did that inform your later years in your professional life? What was the nugget that you took from that childhood that sort of resurfaced even subconsciously?
Oddly enough, it was what I had to let go of, because being from Ontario, there's still that little bit of upper Canada, I'm better than you kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I have a friend who kind of kept me to my right size, and in the springtime, I always told her how great the lilacs were in Ontario. And she would very sarcastically say, of course, the lilacs, everything is better in Ontario. So it was a matter of letting go of what I brought with Ontario, oddly enough.
Oh, that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
That's
Or maybe my friend was just really mean, I don't know.
Well, it could be a little both.
Yeah, it could have been that too.
And then what about high school?
High school, I went to several high schools. I left home at the age of 17, and from there I went to many, many high schools in Toronto itself.
Oh,
I tried I tried alternative schools and regular high schools, and I eventually I finished high school, knuckling down and going to the City Adult Learning Center. And I did it. I took night courses, and I finished it. I finished grade 13. I didn't do grade 11 or grade 12, but I did do grade 13. Yeah. Then you just needed 6 grade 13 credits.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, what was it that prompted you to break out of small town and go to the biggest city in Canada?
Oh, I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to bust out. Okay. Yeah. Toronto was very exciting at the time, and there was the bar scene and it was just really exciting from being a small little village to going to, I was in the annex in Toronto, which was sort of the really cool part of Toronto. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of like Greenwich Village in New York.
Possibly a little bit like that, yeah.
Very artistic.
Yep, very artistic, yeah. Old architecture and, yeah.
So the thread of artistry runs deep.
I suppose. I hadn't really thought of it that way, yeah.
Now, after you left high school, what was the next part of your journey?
Oh, okay, so I left Vancouver. I came to Vancouver a bit on a whim. I was a bit impulsive. One day I decided it was time to leave, and I packed up my suitcases, and I took a cab to the airport and just came to Vancouver.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was a bit impulsive. And then afterwards I thought, oh, what have I done? It was a little bit fast. My brother was in Vancouver, so I had a standing invitation to come. So one time I was 19 and said, yeah, today's the day I'm going to go.
Awesome. And what was your first impression of Vancouver?
I remember walking along Main and Hastings,
Yeah.
and I was 19, and somebody wanted a cigarette or something like that. And I said, no, you can't have a cigarette. And then he proceeded to swear at me. It was a bit rough, right? I didn't know the lay of the land in Vancouver. I just happened to be walking along there, right? Yeah, so it was a bit, and it was November, so it was really dark and gloomy and gray. So first impressions, I was wondering, I thought maybe I'd made a mistake, actually. Yeah.
Well, coming from Ontario, which winters are typically big, bright blue sky and lots of snow, it does take some getting used to the switch in the low cloud cover that well, this year it's been going on for 9 months and counting.
Yeah.
But we're not going to talk about that today. So what would you say about your journey from that point to when you landed here at CRTV?
Well, I can tell you how I did a brief spell for BCTV. It was called BCTV back in the day.
Yeah.
And then I stopped working at BCTV. I was fired, actually, to tell you the truth. I was fired. But then I ended up working with some ex-BCTV people in a production company, and I sort of got my legs. It took care of the shame that I had from being fired. I sort of dusted myself off and picked myself back up again.
Yeah.
And so then I remember I was reading the Vancouver Sun, and it was a little tiny ad in the back of the Vancouver Sun advertising this job at CRTV, and I knew in my bones that that was my job. So I got on the phone and I called up, I sent them my resume, and I got on the phone and I said, I'm going to be in Campbell River next week and visiting friends and family. I had some friends here because I'd lived here before, and I just knew in my bones it was my job, and it turned out to be my job, and for a long time, and that shaped my whole. Well, that became my career, really, right? Yeah.
Well, it did.
Yeah.
You know, in my role with the chamber, I still run into, because I'm out involved in the public a lot, whenever I say, oh, you know, we're getting ready to do a show, everybody asks about you.
Oh.
Because they're all lifelong Campbell Riverites, right? And so everybody remembers, oh, Marjorie did this story, or Marjorie covered us doing that, and Marjorie, like, everybody asks about you all the time. So you are very missed, and your storytelling. But we didn't have to wait too long for storytelling, because you went from video to audio.
Audio's been my true love, actually. I wanted to get into audio before rather than do video in the first place. But what I'm happy about audio is that it's relevant. The whole podcasting industry has made audio relevant. So, and I wasn't too sure how I was going to do it. And it just so happened I was at the Haig Brown House. And I'm sort of lunching a little ahead. Is that okay, like that? Okay, so I'm at Haig Brown House, and COVID is on, and I get to spend the whole year at the Haig Brown House. Normally you have to vacate the house in the wintertime. So there I was in the middle of the winter reading Roderick Haig Brown's Measure of the Year. And then I went out for a walk on the Canyon View Trail, and it occurred to me that could be just a perfect, succinct little podcast, right? There are 12 chapters in Roderick Haig Brown's book, based on the 12 months of the year, and that could be a perfect 12-part episode for the podcasting. And I was in a podcasting course at the time, learning how to do that, you know, just how to market myself, the business of being a podcast producer, right? So I pitched it to the museum, and then we were off to the races. Yeah, and it's been my passion project. Yeah, I'm very excited about it, actually.
Okay, so when you started breaking down the 12 parts, how did you decide who you were going to interview for each of those 12 parts?
Well, that was pretty easy, actually. We had Roderick Haig Brown's children are still all alive and still with it and dynamic. 3 of them are in their 80s, and the youngest is 74, Celia, and she's just now taking a sabbatical from York University, and she might retire, she's not sure. Anyway, the 4 kids are all dynamos, so we call them the kids. And anyway, each kid took care of 4 chapters.
Okay.
And then we had other people sort of come onto the scene. One of the chapters is about visitors, Roderick Haig Brown's visitors, and that was an old neighbor of mine, and he was thrilled to be part of the podcast. The most challenging one was to find one facet of Roderick Haig Brown was that he was a magistrate, a lay judge, and so to find somebody who could talk about what a lay magistrate offers a community, that was the most challenging.
Okay.
So I got on the email, and I sent out a little email to, I started small, started local in Campbell River, and one thing led to another, and I got the perfect person to talk about that, a retired provincial court judge whose father had been a police officer in Campbell River during the 40s who had direct contact with Roderick Haig Brown. So this retired judge, as a little boy, sat in the driveway. Sorry, I've just got to clear my throat.
Oh, that's okay.
Sat in the driveway while his dad would go do police business with Roderick Haig Brown. And he was
awesome.
the most wonderful. That was my favorite episode, actually, I think,
Was
of the
it?
bunch. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I am going to back up just a bit.
Okay, yep.
So after you left Shaw 4
Yes.
years ago, when Shaw went through the big upheaval and a lot of the staff took a buyout that was offered, you headed out on a great big huge adventure. Where did that take you?
Well, first of all, I ended up, I got a job working as a camp host in the Chilcotin Park, South Chilcotin Park.
Right.
So there it was completely different. I got dropped in on a plane.
Yeah.
And I'd have to cook at these cabins. And sometimes I would either have to walk 2 hours to my cabin through grizzly bear country, or there was another one when it was time to leave, I'd have to walk for 5.5 hours out to get picked up by my plane by myself through grizzly bear country.
Wow.
with a podcast playing on speaker to keep the grizzly bears, just to let them know I was coming through.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that really worked, but I'm still here, so I guess it did. Yeah, yeah.
Now, what was your closest encounter with a grizzly?
Closest encounter was, well, they were at our little bunkhouse. There were a couple of fields over, and the mama and her cubs would be in there. Okay. And then there was one time I was sitting at the lake, and then across the lake, there was a beautiful silver-tipped grizzly just bounding across the lake, coming around towards me if I'd stayed put. I still had lots of time to get away, so I did. I went back to the cabin, which was away from off the lake.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you spent the first four months, I guess, after leaving Shaw in the Chilcotin, and
Yes.
then you headed off literally to the other side of the world.
I did, yes. I went and spent a couple of months in Thailand to start. And then after Thailand, I went to India, and I stayed at an ashram, and I studied yoga. And then I went to Nepal and hiked in Nepal.
Okay.
And that took care of 6 months.
Now, in that 6 months, what did you learn?
What did I learn in 6? Oh, well, I think Thailand I'd been to Thailand before, so that wasn't so new, but India was new to me. And when I think of India, I think of this woman. This was in Delhi, and there was a woman, and her lot in life was to make cow patties and for fuel. And I would see her in the morning, and she would be lining up the cow patties along this. It was a busy overpass, and she would be lining up the cow patties. And she had so her hands were all stained with the dung, but she had this beautiful sparkly little ring on her finger. And it was cold. Delhi, it was surprisingly cold. And then I would come back at the end of the day, and there she was with this long line of cow patties to be used for fuel. And that's what she did day in and day out. And I often think of her, and I wish I could speak Hindi just to see what does she think about when she's making those cow patties, right? And I don't know how many years she'd been on that overpass doing that thing, but for whatever reason, she just made an impression on me. I wish I could have talked to her.
I think the one thing that for a lot of us who follow you on Instagram, especially during that time frame when you were in India, were the photographs. Your photographs are absolutely stunning. And And the birds that you've done for the last couple of years are amazing. But what I especially enjoyed about your time in India and Thailand were the faces.
The beautiful faces.
There were such, like, you could tell almost a whole life story from one picture of somebody's face, and just it was really remarkable. So thank you so much for sharing your journey with us through those photographs, because we all went along with you while you were.
Well, it's too bad there are many faces that I didn't shoot, only in my mind, right? Because they were just so interesting. But there's a whole procedure to take of somebody's photo. You know, there's permission and trust, and
Yes.
and don't just want to snap a picture and then see you later. There's a relationship that has to happen first, right? So
Right, and you've always been so brilliant at that, in that establishment of a relationship. After working here for 17 years, and everybody that you were filming, there had to be, and now you're on the other side of that relationship
you're fine,
today.
I'd say. Yeah.
And then you came back, and then you went back to the camps.
I went back and did
Chakotay,
another
right?
season. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then after that, what came next?
Then after that, that was the trip to Mexico.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I had friends that were in Mexico, and I remember I was a little bit lonely. That 6 months when I was in Asia, I was a little bit lonely. So I thought, well, let's just go somewhere a little closer, and a little familiar. Plus, I'm crazy about learning Spanish, and I was missing speaking Spanish. so I went back to Mexico. Yeah.
Okay. And then came the beginning of Haig Brown.
Yeah, then, so I was in March 20th, I was in, like everybody else, come home, COVID starting. And when I was in Mexico, everything was just fine. There was lots of food, the fruit stands were overflowing, and I'd hear these horrendous stories about people, acting horribly at Costco and hoarding and all that. And I think, what? I don't think I want to go back. But I was persuaded to come back, and yeah.
And then you became the house manager?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
I got to be the site manager at Haig Brown House. Yeah.
Okay.
And so there wasn't really much of a season. We would be open, then we'd be closed, and we'd be open, then we'd be closed.
Now, I think it would help, because not everybody has an understanding of what Haig Brown does in the matter of a year. So in a period of 12 months, how does Haig Brown typically operate?
Okay, so in a normal year, May to October is a bed and breakfast.
Okay.
And we have 4 bedrooms, and people can come and stay, and lots of enthusiasts, Haig Brown enthusiasts, come and stay. And then from November to April, it's a writer-in-residence program.
Okay.
So the writer comes and stays in the house and does community outreach and works on his or her work and lives in the house and keeps the fire burning.
And I understand that is it the Campbell River Arts Council that chooses the writer-in-residence along with museum folk?
There's a board.
There's a board. Okay.
For that, yeah.
And
it's part of the museum.
Right.
Yes.
So the whole of the property is held in trust by the city, but it's operated by the museum?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Yes. It is such a beautiful property, and you have weddings there as well.
We have weddings there and celebrations of garden parties, yes. Celebrations of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Now, you are in your second year?
This will be my 3rd season.
3rd season,
yeah.
Okay. See, time just So you're in your 3rd season, and when did you start the podcast? Was that a year ago?
The podcast we did our first recording about a year ago, yeah.
Okay. Now, you are the producer and the editor, but who actually was doing the interview part?
Dan McLennan. And
There's
Dan
a name from the past.
Yes, and Dan McLennan has sat in both these chairs many, many times doing interviews and things like that, yes.
He did.
Yes.
A long-time journalist from the Campbell River Mirror, decades.
Well, Mirror, and then he was the North Island Courier.
North Island Courier, yes.
Yep, yeah.
Okay.
And then he did freelancing for CBC as well.
Right.
He was the perfect person to be the host. Perfect. Yeah, it was really good to work with him.
Because he has all the history of Campbell River.
Has all the history, yes, yeah.
So when you sat down with, who was it that you first took the idea to about the podcast? Was it?
To Sandra Parrish.
Sandra Parrish.
Yeah, and she was on board right away.
Okay, and Sandra Parrish, of course, is the executive director of the museum at Campbell River. And oh gosh, Sandra's been in that position for a very long time.
Long time.
I remember the interview we did with her when they were celebrating the 60 years of the museum, and they celebrated with a book. I remember doing an interview with her on that. And so, so you sat with Sandra, and what was her initial reaction when you said, "Here's my idea"?
Well, she was all for it. Yeah, she just embraced it and then proceeded to talk. Everything, we sort of run it by the kids. So she ran it by the 4 Haig Brown children, and they were all for it. So,
awesome.
yeah.
Now, where do the 4 children now live?
They're all over the place, actually. The eldest, Valerie, is in Waterton Park in Alberta. And so she's on the edge of the park. And just up until recently, she was still a guide. And so her front yard has grizzlies in it. And she does her hikes in the woods still, and yeah, she's a force. She's great, and her house is lined with books, much like the house where she grew up in.
Yes. And
then Celia, the youngest, is a prophet at York University. Mary is in Victoria, the second eldest, and then there's Alan, who spends half his time in New Westminster and half the time in Thailand during normal times. I'm sure he's gone back to Thailand now.
All right. Now, did you have a chance to just sort of chat with them, or they would come and did they call in? Like, how did that work?
What we
doing
did was
things remotely?
it was really important to have good audio. So what we had was we had a really nice blue Yeti mic that was all wrapped up, and it would be sent from kid to kid to kid, well, from guest to guest to guest.
Oh.
And so then it was a matter of being on the phone, doing and we had a virtual studio.
Yeah.
So it was a matter of sometimes for some people it was easier than others.
Yeah.
There was one guest who will not be named who was just awful, and the mic came back in pieces. Yes, that was the tough one. But I won't say who that was, or if it was male or female. But other than that, everything worked out really well, actually. Yeah, we just had one tough interview.
Okay.
Yeah, the rest were, but I'm thinking that's probably the hardest interview that I'll ever have to do in my whole life, and it's behind me now. So there you go.
That's a great way to look at it.
It was great, yeah. But I was actually doing the interviews, because I was in Mexico last winter, so this was all done remotely. So yeah, it's pretty great.
Unbelievable. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, you need to be applauded just for managing the logistics around lining up 12 separate interviews with 12 different people in 12 different locations, coordinating all of that, and not just them, but shipping equipment to them and then getting it back again.
I had a whip. We're on a schedule here. Yeah, no, I really wanted to complete it in a year.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, that is fantastic. Now, there are probably many, many people watching that are very interested in where they can find this podcast.
Well, it's on anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple. It's also on the website for the Campbell River Museum.
Okay.
Or no, the Haig Brown House Museum, which is linked to the museum as well. Okay. It's all linked together. But yeah, wherever you listen to podcasts, that's where it is. Yeah, it's called Taking Measure.
Taking Measure.
Yeah.
And is that the name of his book that first gave you the idea?
The book is Measure of the Year.
Measure of the Year.
And Dan came up with the title Taking Measure. Yeah, which is perfect. That sort of was the thread that we did the podcast through, right?
Lovely.
Yeah.
So now that you have this one behind you and so unbelievably successfully, what's next?
Well, I'm shopping around for another podcast to do. I like the idea. Some podcasts are just endless, right? They just go on for years and years at a time. But I'm meeting with somebody in a couple of months. Well, actually, it'll be one more month now, and something related to the museum. I think there's lots of audio stories to be told with museums, and so I think there's a whole niche there that I'm going to explore, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I do like the idea of a set series. And I find not just in the video series that are on all the streaming devices, but I'm really enjoying the ones that are short. Yep. There was one on, just as an example, Knowledge Network had a 3-part series called Generation War, and it was just a 3-parter. Each one was an hour and a half, and it was a phenomenal story, and it had everything that, it was all based on a book. So it had the beginning, the arc, and the denouement. And I really like that idea. So I love that you are doing the set series, because I think it also must help you with the thought process.
Yeah, that too. Like the way my life is right now, it's divided up. I do 6 months at Haig Brown House, and then I have 6 months to travel.
Okay.
and slow travel, right? So,
Yeah.
so the fact that I can do a project-based thing works for me rather. Because once the house gets rolling and there's the
It's
changeover,
busy.
gets it's super busy, right?
And I'm guessing this summer is particularly busy because the world is pretty much opened up
it's
again.
getting that way, and we've got guests coming from Germany, from France, from the Americans are coming, and so that's really great, actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's wonderful to
yeah.
hear. So we are almost out of time. What would you like to share with us
What would I like to share? I don't know, Mary Ruth. I don't know. I need a little prompting here.
Okay, so try to encapsulate your 17 years here in this building.
Well, it did shape me. I did a lot of growing in this building, both personally and professionally. I learned how to use equipment. I didn't know how to use any equipment when I first arrived. Hugh Smith handed me a camera when I first got here, and I was so used to working with camera people and editors. I went, well, what's that? And I remember taking the camera home and putting it on the floor, and it took me until Sunday afternoon to actually open it up. I was terrified of the camera, and I went from that to feeling pretty comfortable. And we did. It was linear editing when I started, and we got into digital editing, and so I'm really grateful for my time here. I got to meet the community on an intimate level.
Yes.
And tell stories. And part of me still misses it a little tiny bit. I would like to have a camera and a little edit suite, and no timeline and no deadline, and just do stories still. So maybe there's a way to do it still. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, and that's what you're doing with your podcast.
That's
is
what
you're
I'm doing
still
with the
doing the
podcast,
stories. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Marjorie, thank you so much for taking the time to come in and talking to us and sharing with us the stories and your path. It's such an interesting journey, and it's just, you're halfway. You still have another 50 years ahead of you. So
We'll be amazed before we're halfway through.
I'm really excited to see what the next 50 years hold for you. And I can't wait to hear the next couple of podcast series from you. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks, Mary Ruth.
You have been watching Explore, coming to you here from Shaw Spotlight Studios on Rob Ron Road. Please join us again.